Dear friends, today's crisis will be even worse than the last financial crisis. This is the wide consensus view among political leaders, central bankers, international organizations. The worst, because never before has a crisis been so big, so widespread and so deep. It hits hard almost all countries at once, the virus is almost everywhere, and different forms of lockdown have been adopted everywhere, demand and supply shocks are everywhere. It also hits hard many sectors at once, from healthcare to tourism to banking. Some side effects, so to say, like the fall of oil prices and the skyrocketing surge of public spending, may fuel financial crisis, a concrete risk, especially for highly indebted countries and for rentier states. Facing such a big, widespread and deep crisis, we are all looking for answers. The first place we look for are short-run responses to the emergency taken by national governments. Measures to secure masks and ventilators, to provide liquidity to companies, to protect jobs and incomes. Huge short-term measures whose rationale is every country for itself. But beyond the emergency and beyond national measures, a coordinated international response is required more than ever to face a mid to long-term challenge posed by today's crisis. To this aim, what can we learn from the previous crisis? How did we get to some kind of collective response in the past? The 2007-2009 economic and financial crisis upgraded the G20 summit to the main forum to discuss and coordinate global policy responses. Many back then acknowledged that the G7 was increasingly falling short, both in terms of financial firepower and symbolically, as G7 countries were some of those most affected by the crisis and actually originated it. How did we get to this transformation or evolution 10 years ago? First, the G20 was swiftly upgraded from the level of finance minister and central bank governor to that of head of state and government. Second, in just 2 years, world leaders agreed to hold 5 summits. Third, the G20 fostered unprecedented level of financial coordination with the biggest economic stimulus ever coordinated across countries. A stimulus that has been credited from rescuing the global economy from the specter of a steeper and more prolonged recession. In the eyes of many, it was the time in which the G20 really mattered. Since then, the G20 has been piling up commitment and objective and extended its scope from climate change to education, from agriculture to the digital revolution, but at risk of overstretching and losing momentum. In the midst of the coronavirus crisis, potentially bigger, deeper and more widespread, is this the time for another G20 moment? More specifically, will the G20 be able to act fast and hold, virtually or not, all the necessary summits this year? Will it be able to revise its planned agenda in order to face the issues involving the global pandemic head-on? Will it be able to provide down-to-earth solutions at the same speed and depth as 10 years ago? Or rather, taken by surprise, are we running the risk of G20 measures similar to the one in 2008, but implemented at a slower pace in a context of deeper crisis? Economic stimulus plans have been announced with little to no consultation among G20 countries. The recent G20 response, a package of about $5 trillion, seems more the sum of scattered national responses than the result of proper coordination. And even within Eurozone countries, this crisis appears to generate more bickering than consensus. If this will be the case over the next month, it would tell a lot about today's world, about the standing of its political leaders and about the division and fragmentation of the global context. It is indeed a very different world from Obama's diplomatic engagement and China's peaceful rise. How about Italy, which will host the G20 summit next year? Surely Rome will need to make some hard choices. First, the Italian government will need to revise the G20 agenda by adapting it to a world that will still be coping with the effect of the pandemic. It will need to do so without losing sight of other issues that were perceived as vital just a month ago, such as climate change and sustainability, inequality and the future of the world. Second, it will need to stay focused on emergency short-term responses, but without forgetting the long-term changes for our economies and society, the way we live, work and travel, but also the role of the state and cities, personal liberties and privacy. Third, It will need to embark in Challenge 1 and 2, facing an even more fragmented and divided world, after a long period in which leaders constantly say, "my country first," and try to provide short-term emergency solutions to the crisis in their country. A decade ago, the G20 was able to rise up to the challenge with some revolution and provided a forum for leaders to coordinate action. It had a role to play and played it well, especially during the apex of the crisis. Other revolutions are needed, and as we face a bigger crisis which may also prove that even the G20 is not enough. New agenda, new format, new ideas and new solutions. This is not the time for empty rituals, photo opportunities and endless debates on the possibility or not of a final communiqué. It's time for global action, if not now, when?